The latch on the spring house door was cold enough to sting my fingers, and when I lifted it, I found my wife sitting on an overturned milk pail in the dark. It was not yet 5 in the morning. We had been married less than 12 hours. Her wedding dress was folded over one arm, and she had wrapped herself in an old gray shawl that belonged to my mother. She looked at me as though I had caught her doing something shameful. I remember the smell of damp stone, raw milk, and the kerosene from the lamp in my hand. I asked whether she was cold. She said no. I asked whether she wanted breakfast. She said she would come in soon. But I did not ask the question that was sitting between us. I did not ask why she had hidden from me after our wedding night. I thought giving her space was kindness. By the time I understood what she was afraid of, silence had already taken more from our marriage than either of us knew how to name. My name is Jonas. I am an Amish husband, a father, and the head of a household. I have spent most of my adult life trying to lead with steadiness. I tell these stories because the quiet parts of a marriage are often the parts outsiders never see. If you have ever mistaken silence for peace, I hope you will stay with me through this one, and tell me afterward whether you think a man can wait too long to ask a gentle question. My wife Miriam and I had known one another since we were children, but knowing someone in a community is not the same as knowing the rooms inside their heart. I knew the sound of her laugh from youth gatherings. I knew she could sew a straight seam faster than most women twice her age. I knew she preferred apple butter without cloves, and that she always carried a spare handkerchief in the sleeve of her dress. I knew her father was a careful man, and her mother had died when Miriam was 9. I did not know what that loss had taught her about marriage. Our wedding was held in November, after harvest, when the fields were brown and the mornings carried frost. There were more than 200 people in the house and barn. Benches stood shoulder to shoulder. Steam clouded the kitchen windows. Men passed platters of roast chicken and bowls of mashed potatoes, while children slipped between coats and chair legs. By evening, my face hurt from smiling. Miriam smiled too, but hers looked smaller as the day went on. I noticed. I told myself she was tired. That night, when the last wagon wheels had faded down the lane and the house finally settled, we went upstairs to the room that would be ours. I will not turn a private marriage into spectacle. What matters is that Miriam was frightened, and I could feel it. Her hands shook when she unpinned her covering. She answered every question with 1 or 2 words. I slowed down. I told her there was no hurry. I thought that was enough. I thought restraint spoke for itself. But a man can be careful in his actions and still careless in what he leaves unspoken. Before daylight, I woke and found her side of the bed empty. That was when I went looking and found her in the spring house. She came back inside after sunrise. She made coffee. She fried eggs in the black pan my mother had given us. We sat across from one another at the small kitchen table, and I spoke about ordinary things. I told her the south fence needed 2 new posts. I said the mare had been favoring her left hind leg. I asked whether she wanted to visit her sister on Sunday. Miriam answered politely. The whole time I could see a red mark across her palm where she had gripped the edge of the milk pail. I nearly asked then. Instead, I decided not to press her. In the world I was raised in, a husband was expected to be steady, not prying. My father had never asked many questions. He watched. He waited. He believed people spoke when they were ready. I had admired that in him. I copied it without understanding that patience and distance can look almost identical from the other side of a table. The next morning, Miriam was gone from the bed again. I found her in the pantry, sitting on a flour sack with her knees drawn up. On the 3rd morning, she was in the mudroom. On the 4th, she had gone outside and was standing by the fence before dawn, without gloves, staring toward the road that led back to her father's farm. Each time I asked whether she was all right. Each time she said she was only thinking. I believed a good husband should not corner his wife, so I gave her room. I gave her so much room that before long there was a distance between us wide enough to live in. During the day, our life looked proper. We worked, we prayed, we visited family. Miriam kept the house with care. She learned where I stored nails and harness oil. She mended my shirts before I noticed the tears. At supper, she placed my plate first, as she had seen other wives do. If neighbors came by, she smiled. Nobody would have guessed that many nights she lay stiff beside me, listening to the clock downstairs, or that some mornings I woke to the sound of the back door closing. I began to think she regretted marrying me. That thought embarrassed me, so I did what proud men often do when they are afraid. I became useful. I split more wood than we needed. I repaired a shed roof that could have waited until spring. I accepted extra work in a cabinet shop 3 miles away. I left before sunrise and came home after dark with sawdust in my cuffs. I told myself I was providing. In truth, work gave me a place where I did not have to face what I could not solve. Miriam grew quieter. I grew busier. We were married, but we moved around one another like two people trying not to disturb a sleeping child. 6 weeks after the wedding, my sister Anna came to help with quilting. She watched Miriam through the afternoon, saying little. When Anna was preparing to leave, she found me in the barn and asked whether things were well in the house. I said they were. She looked at me for a long moment and said, "A quiet woman is not always a peaceful woman." That was all. I remember the way she tightened the scarf beneath her chin after she said it. I nearly followed her back inside to ask Miriam the question I should have asked on the first morning. But pride is often only fear wearing a clean shirt. I told myself Anna was imagining trouble. Winter settled over us. Snow banked against the north side of the house. The pump handle froze twice. In January, Miriam stopped going to bed before me. She would sit downstairs with a basket of mending until she heard me settle above. Then she would come up quietly, believing I was asleep. I knew. I lay in the dark and listened to each stair creak. I wanted to reach for her, but by then, every movement felt heavy with meaning. I feared that asking would force her to say she had made a mistake, so I chose the pain I knew over the answer I feared. That is the part I am least proud to tell. I had convinced myself I was protecting her, but much of what I called patience was self-protection. The breaking point came on a Tuesday night in February. Wind pushed snow beneath the kitchen door. We had eaten bean soup and brown bread. Miriam dropped a spoon while washing dishes, and when it struck the floor, she startled so hard that the basin tipped. Water spread across the boards. She stood frozen, staring at the spoon. I picked it up and said her name. She began to cry. Not loudly. Miriam never did anything loudly. Her shoulders folded inward, and she covered her mouth with both hands as though even the sound of grief needed permission. I moved toward her, then stopped. For the first time, I did not ask whether she was all right. I asked, "Are you afraid of me?" She looked at me, and the answer was already there before she spoke. She said, "I am afraid of what being your wife will require." Those words did not make sense to me at first. I told her I had never forced her. She said she knew. I told her I would never harm her. She said she knew that too. Then she told me what I had never asked. When Miriam was 9, her mother had died after giving birth to her 7th child. The labor had lasted 2 days. The roads were deep with spring mud and help came late. Miriam had been kept in the next room with her younger sisters, listening through a wall. Afterward, nobody explained much. Adults spoke in lowered voices. Her father grieved in silence. Within a year, the household returned to its routines because farms and children do not wait for sorrow. But Miriam carried one lesson from that night into womanhood. Marriage led to pregnancy. Pregnancy led to suffering, and a good wife was expected to accept both without complaint. As our wedding approached, every older woman who joked about babies, every folded cradle blanket, every knowing smile had tightened that fear around her. She had tried to tell her aunt once. Her aunt said all brides were nervous. So Miriam decided fear was something she was supposed to overcome alone. On our wedding night, when I told her there was no hurry, she heard kindness, but she did not hear a promise. She did not know whether no hurry meant a day, a week, or only a few minutes. And because I never asked what frightened her, she believed the question itself was forbidden. She hid because the small locked rooms of the spring house and pantry were the only places where she felt she still belonged to herself. I sat at the kitchen table while the spilled water soaked into my socks. There are moments when a man sees himself clearly, and the sight is not flattering. I had not threatened my wife. I had not raised my voice. I had not forced anything from her. Yet I had watched her disappear each morning and accepted her silence because it spared me discomfort. I thought goodness meant avoiding cruelty. That night I learned it also means having the courage to enter another person's fear without demanding that they make it easy for you. I asked Miriam what she needed from me. It was the first useful question I had asked in 2 months. She said she needed to know that her body was not a debt she owed because we were married. She needed to know that we could speak about children without deciding everything at once. She needed time, and she needed the freedom to say when fear was rising before it carried her out of the room. I told her she had all of that. Then I said the words I should have said from the beginning. You are my wife, not my possession. She cried harder after that, and I did too. We did not solve everything in one night. Truth rarely repairs in an hour what silence has been damaging for months. For a while, Miriam still woke before dawn. Sometimes she still went downstairs. The difference was that she no longer hid. She would light the lamp and sit at the table, and if I heard her, I came down and sat across from her. Some mornings we spoke. Other mornings we drank coffee without saying much. But the silence was different because it was shared, not abandoned. We also spoke with an older married couple we trusted, people who understood that privacy should protect a marriage, not imprison it. The husband told me something I have remembered ever since. He said leadership in a home does not mean always having the answer. Sometimes it means being the first one willing to ask the question everyone fears. Spring came slowly that year. The snow pulled back from the fence lines. Water ran in the ditches. One morning in April, I woke and found Miriam beside me, still asleep, one hand resting open on the blanket between us. It was such a small thing, but I lay there for a long time, looking at that open hand. Trust had returned quietly. Not all at once, not because I had earned a clean ending, but because Miriam had chosen, day after day, to believe my words when my actions finally began to match them. Years have passed since then. We did become parents, but not because a calendar or a community decided the time for us. We entered that season together, with honest conversations, practical help, and more tenderness than I knew how to offer as a newly married man. Miriam still misses her mother. Certain sounds and certain winter nights can bring old fear close. I no longer treat that fear as a problem to fix quickly. I ask what it needs. I stay. That is what I understand now. A husband can be gentle and still fail to make his wife feel safe. Good intentions do not replace clear words. Silence is not always respect. Sometimes silence is a wall, and the person you love is waiting on the other side for you to knock. I waited too long because I was afraid of the answer. By the time I asked, my wife had spent 2 months believing she had entered a marriage where her deepest fear had no language. I cannot give those months back to her. What I can do is tell the truth about them and live differently because of what they taught me. If these quiet stories from Amish life mean something to you, you are welcome to subscribe and stay with us. And I would like to ask you one honest question. Have you ever stayed silent because you thought you were being kind, only to realize later that the silence had caused its own wound?